It's the champ, Shannon the Cannon, two-time heavyweight champion of the world. And you're watching Sports Icons. Subscribe. Let's go, champ. Let's go, champ. Let's go, champ. Champ.
Okay, so Frank Bruno, British boxing legend and absolute icon, former WBC World Heavyweight Champion after he defeated Oliver McCall. I remember that night like it was yesterday, and I haven't had a moment like it since, to be honest with you. I've had a few very, very exciting high nights, that's for sure, but this particular one will probably live with me forever. It really would. Of course, I was very, very young when it happened, but I grew up, if you like, within the Frank Bruno era. Of course, when we're talking about the era, which of course what this video is going to be about, we're talking Frank Bruno, Lennox Lewis, Mike Tyson, Evander Holyfield, Riddick Bowe, the comeback of George Foreman, Tommy Morrison, etc., etc. Okay, so when we're talking about that particular era, myself and many of you who of course lived through that era as well, will look on it with great nostalgia. At the time, nobody was calling it the golden era, or a golden era. Looking back, people do. Much like with this particular era that's going on right now, people are not saying it's a golden era. In the years to come, when this era is all said and done, maybe people will. Okay? Anyway, so on to the point of this video. Frank Bruno, of course, has spoken about Tyson Fury. In fact, he spoke to DAZN. I haven't seen the interview. I looked on YouTube. I couldn't see it on DAZN. So maybe it's online or something. I should have really checked, to be honest with you. Either way, I've got this quote from Michael Benson, the online editor for Talk Sport, where Frank Bruno said this about Tyson Fury. Again, I don't know in what context, no idea, but this is what he had to say. Fury knows deep down in his heart, if he was around in my day, they'd eat him for dinner. I'm not going to sit here and disrespect him, but we're talking about a different era. He's living on a different cloud to what I was on. Frank Bruno's statement. So as I said, I don't know what context Frank Bruno was talking about. Is he joking? Is he not? I don't know. But is he talking about himself? Maybe. But of course, he's talking about the top guys of his division and his era in particular. And of course, when we're talking about his era, we're talking mid to late 80s, all the way up to 1998, 99, maybe even 2000. Okay, that was pretty much the era. That's what I remember. I remember watching Frank Bruno, him versus Mike Tyson, him versus Lennox Lewis, Lennox Lewis versus Mike Tyson, of course, more recently, Evander Holyfield versus Riddick Bowe on 3 occasions, etc., etc. Okay, so I remember watching all these fighters live. Okay, now to say that Tyson Fury would be eaten for dinner by these guys, of course, we're going to look at some of the fighters again with nostalgia. So we're going to have bias. We are. But I think to compare anybody from this particular era to that era, it's a bit premature. I'm not saying Frank Bruno is doing that, but for me, let's wait and see until Tyson Fury's career is finished. Then we can make a judgment. An example would be Lennox Lewis. In my opinion, you put Lennox Lewis in there with Tyson Fury, or anybody of this particular heavyweight era, I think that Lennox Lewis wipes the floor with everybody, knocks everybody out. I do. Stylistically, there'll be some difficult fights for him, for sure. Maybe he may even take a Hasim Rahman knockout loss. Maybe. Okay? But in my opinion, again, I mean, maybe I'm being biased. I think Lennox Lewis is the greatest heavyweight of all time. Some will say Muhammad Ali. Hey, maybe rightfully so. Personally, I have Muhammad Ali in second place. But again, I'm not a historian, okay? I wouldn't be able to defend that argument as much as other people would against it, if you like. But for me, Lennox Lewis was the best. He really was. But how would Tyson Fury get on with Frank Bruno? Well, I think if Frank Bruno landed his big right hand on Tyson Fury, there's a very real chance Tyson would go down and not get back up again. But I think the work rate of Tyson Fury would tire out Frank Bruno for a late Tyson Fury stoppage, in my opinion. Okay? But again, just comparing the eras, you could look at, say, how would... In fact, I'm actually do a separate video on this one, just go a little bit more in depth, because obviously I lived through that era of how would Tyson Fury get on with Riddick Bowe? How would Alexander Usyk get on with Evander Holyfield? How would Dillian Whyte get on with Mike Tyson? How would Anthony Joshua get on with Lennox Lewis? See, there's quite a few comparisons. Again, nostalgia, people will usually favour the past fighter out of respect and that, of course. But I can agree in some part with Frank Bruno. I think that there are fighters of that particular era that Tyson Fury would beat. I think that he would beat Mike Tyson. I loved Mike Tyson. He scared the hell out of me when I was a kid. Okay, so I remember watching his fights live. I remember watching him on video and whatever else. He was a frightening, frightening man. But the reality is, when you look back at it, those who done well against Mike Tyson, those who defeated Mike Tyson are those who figured him out. Those who weren't afraid of him. Tyson Fury ain't going to be afraid of him. He wouldn't be afraid of him. When you don't let Mike Tyson on your chest, crouch down, and then go down to your waist level and then come up with one of the huge uppercuts or overhands, there's not too much more Mike Tyson would do. As good as what he was, as frightening as what he was for me, I think a lot of the opponents for Mike Tyson lost before they even got in the ring because they were frightened to death of him. That's my honest opinion on it. But Mike Tyson, absolute legend. He was. Riddick Bowe, again, former undisputed world champion. Again, I remember him throwing the WBC belt in the trash. I remember that. I remember Lennox Lewis versus Frank Bruno. I mean, what a hell of a night that was. Hell of a night. I remember Lennox Lewis getting stopped by Hasim Rahman and Oliver McCall. I remember the rematches. Of course, I remember Lennox Lewis's last fight against Vitaly Klitschko. Again, how would Tyson Fury get on with a prime Vitaly Klitschko? How would Tyson Fury get on with a prime Vladimir Klitschko? There's a lot of questions for it. So I can understand what Frank Bruno's talking about. Again, I think Frank Bruno, I mean, how would him versus Anthony Joshua go? I think Frank Bruno, a lot of people underrated him because obviously he got a couple of world title shots. Of course, he lost those. Once to Lennox Lewis, of course. The first fight with Mike Tyson and so forth. But Frank Bruno was actually much better than I think a lot of people give him credit for. So how would he get on with Tyson Fury? As I said, I think that Tyson Fury's work rate alone would probably tire out Frank Bruno and ultimately stop Frank Bruno late on. But that's not taking anything away from Frank Bruno. Absolute legend. I love Frank Bruno. But anyway, listen, that's my thoughts on it all. Of course, you dropped me yours. Do you agree with Frank Bruno? Do you think that the heavyweights of his particular era, again, we're talking late 80s, mid 80s to late 80s, all the way up to maybe the year 2000-ish. Would they all eat Tyson Fury for dinner? How would George Foreman have got on? Of course, we're talking about the comeback of George Foreman. Tommy Morrison. Drop your thoughts below. Click thumbs up. Subscribe. Catch you on the next video.